Well, hey, this is the second Sunday of the month, so it's Missions Update Sunday. And a while back, I was thinking, we've had virtually all of our missionaries that we support, whether foreign, domestic, or local, we've had them come and share. Our first Mission Sunday, we had the Basingers here. They were home on furlough from Indonesia. We had Josiah. We've had the Path of Life, of course, Power Ministries. We had Doug and Trevor share, and then we had Doug and Tim and Evan share. So we pretty much had a representation of all of our missions, but we never had Pacific Justice Institute because they're kind of a big thing. They help protect our religious freedoms legally, as well as parental rights and the sanctity of life, that type of thing. So a really awesome organization that have felt to support, and we've been supporting them as a church. We feel to give to missions, and that is how much should we give? Well, 10%. Plus what you guys contribute. And thank you. Those of you that made faith promises to give to missions, and those of you that are honoring that, which I think is most of you, that's helping do a lot of great stuff. Even like David shared the offering this morning, that we give to advance the kingdom. And so with all that in mind, I'm like, well, we've never had Pacific Justice Institute come and share. Well, then I got an email from the Pacific Justice Institute. I do recommend you get their email. And they said, hey, we can come, one of our lawyers come and share at your church for free. I'm like, hey, Courtney, maybe we should have Pacific Justice Institute come. Courtney's our missions director, and he's like, yeah, let's do it. So we went forward in the process, and I'm going to let Tracy Tribbett come and introduce the guest that she also brought. Tracy is from the Tri-Cities and the Pacific Justice Institute. She oversees Eastern Washington, I understand, and she brought with her coworker, Kate, from North Idaho, but I'll let you tell the story.
Hi, thank you for having us. My name is Tracy Tribbett, and this is Catherine Hartley. I cover Washington along with one other attorney who's on the west side, and then Catherine heads up the Idaho office. And since we're so close, and many of you may be moving to Idaho eventually, we thought we'd talk about both states and what's going on there. Yeah, and Catherine was a transplant, or Kate, from Colorado? California? Yes, both. So she's got a lot of knowledge. Yeah, exactly. So thank you all for your support at Pacific Justice Institute. For us, for me personally, being able to work amongst Christians on Christian issues is such a blessing for me and my family, and I just want to thank you from the very bottom of my heart for your support. What we do at PJI is represent individuals who are sort of caught in the crosshairs of exercising their faith where faith and law meet. So our civil religious liberties, those are the types of cases that we take on, along with parental rights issues. We started in California. Our founder, Brad Dacus, he's barred in California and Texas, and he saw this need come about for an entity that handled issues from the very small to the very large. There are a lot of institutes or nonprofits out there which handle civil religious liberties, but you'll find that most of them sort of operate in the Supreme Court realm and handle the really big cases. At PJI, we are really intensely interested in all actions. And what that looks like on the ground is coming to speak at churches to help people who were terminated through the vaccine mandate with their unemployment benefit appeals, to go and speak to individual parent groups, to help out really on any issues, no matter how large or how small. And so if you have an issue that is particularly affecting your rights or your community, please let us know, and we'd love to come help in whatever fashion or form that takes. The cases that we're handling right now largely deal in Washington with the vaccine mandate. I have approximately 10 cases that deal with firefighters, police officers, social workers, and a variety of other individuals who were terminated from their jobs for not taking the vaccine. And, the interesting thing there that I think it's important to point out is that we don't necessarily have a constitutional right to a job, but you have a statutory or a law-created right not to be discriminated against in your job. And so that's where we're fighting. We have chosen in Washington State through PJI to sue employers directly, not the governor at large. And I know a large portion of people's question was, how can the governor do this? Why can he do this? And the answer to that question is because our legislative body gave him the power to do so. I don't think that they foresaw how far that would go. I think they had in mind different types of acts of God, like landslides or snowstorms that took out power, short-term things. Unfortunately, they never limited those powers to time frame. So I'm hopeful, and again, this is why it's so important that we get representatives who do a good job in the process of passing laws, of thoughtfully considering what the future might look like. If they could have sort of cabined those powers with 120 days, or if they could go back and amend it and do so. That's why it's important for our representatives to get on those committees for healthcare, for emergency powers of the governor and others in authority for the schools. Because these laws, we're in a blue state. It is highly unlikely that that is going to change. I mean, it could, don't get me wrong. I think Tiffany Smiley came close, right? She did good. But the important thing is to get our red representatives on those committees and get in some additions to those laws that are getting passed, like the Bill 5599. And Kate and I can both kind of speak to this because in Idaho, it's the opposite. It's the other side of that coin. They passed laws against it. We passed laws for it. And so you can see how things are going to start to flow. But even in that bill, they attempted to amend it by adding an age requirement of 16 or 17. That was denied. It was shot down. But, it was an attempt to amend it to at least get to the older kids. And for those of you who don't know, Bill 5599 states that if a child runs away from home and the police encounter that child, and they know that the child is a runaway and they have the contact information of the parent, they are to contact the parent unless the child is fleeing the home for health or what they identify as health procedures, which include abortion or which include the gender-affirming care. And what that does is it puts the child into the slipstream of DCYF. It'll kind of be couched in DCYF, which is our new way of saying CPS. Have you noticed how CPS kind of continues to rebrand itself with different acronyms every few years to kind of get away from the bad taste in everyone's mouth? And so what it does is it puts these children in the homes, and then it proceeds to start giving them that gender-affirming care or those abortion services or whatever it is. And we all know how we were as teens. I was rebellious as a teen. If I had possibly had the opportunity to just say, okay, I want to run away from home, and the state would have protected me from my parents, my life could have gone very differently. And so it's important as we're raising our children to make sure our walk with them is close. Because once they get into that system, it's very hard to extract them out. And I've had some cases where children get taken away from parents, and it takes years to get them back, if at all. So this bill also states that anyone who is a state agent is not to comply, and state agents can also be the foster parents. They are not to comply with a court order to return the child. So generally states agree, they work together to extradite individuals, or, they have that full faith and credit of, we'll help you enforce your laws, and we'll extradite anyone who's breaking them and return that person back to you. This does the exact opposite of that, and it does so to a very vulnerable population, children. Think about all the traffickers that now know that they can take children to Washington and won't have any threat of extraditing them if they've raped them, or if the children, just a variety of awful things. We don't need to go into specifics, but it really creates the opportunity for a lot of things to go wrong here in general, and specifically with our children. And so if Idaho wants a child back because that child has been kidnapped and taken over into Washington, of course, depending on the circumstances, if the child wanted to go back, they would go back. But if you've got a child who is confused, who has been brainwashed by their trafficker, by the person who has abducted them, it would be very difficult for a parent to get their child back from Idaho. That's why if you have a child in Washington and you get wind of any of this in their life, it would be good to take them to Idaho, and then you can contact Kate and make sure that your child is protected, that there are ways and means. I literally had a case where the state tried to take away a 2.5-month-old from parents, and we had to Mom and baby had to abscond. We hid them. We had burner phones that we communicated with. They arrested dad. These things get serious, and they get serious fast. And this was in the state of Washington. And so, it can become very scary very quickly. And the state deems itself a better parent than you are, because they don't recognize that God gave you your parental rights, not them. And when we don't have that respect for the basic familial associations and for basic constitutional rights, that is an issue. And what has continued to become an issue in Washington state, and this is a fairly recent case that's gotten a bit of publicity, there is a traditional Korean women's spa in Seattle, and they only allow women into the spa. And this began, and you can see how it's picking up speed with the gender ideology, transgenderism, and this is, literally even in psychology books, it's a mental illness. And what we're starting to do now is, rather than help people who are mentally ill, we're now indulging them in all of these things and helping them to really, what Satan wants is to kill, steal, and destroy. And we're assisting him in these ways. So we have a client who's a spa, and allegedly a preoperative transgender woman, which is a man, tried to come into the spa and then reported the spa to the Human Rights Commission in Washington state. Our client looked through their records and said, no, this person never came in, and tried to present that information to the Human Rights Commission, just from a basic standpoint of, yes, this is our policy, but as to these facts, this person never came into our spa. The Human Rights Commission did not care. They said the time for you to ensure that this person does not feel discriminated against has passed. You must change your website language. You must change your policies and procedures, and you must read through and engage with us in the literature that we send you. So you've got speech police and thought police going on here. So we ended the administrative proceedings with this Human Rights Commission and then brought suit. And to kind of backtrack a little bit, an important nuance in the law are agency proceedings. So when you think agency, Department of Health, the Human Rights Commission, DCYF, and you can tell there's a theme here in the things I talk about, our legislature creates these agencies. These agencies function like their own, they have no separation of powers. So how we have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches, these agencies are their own. They get the power from the legislative branch, and then they create their own laws. All of our Washington administrative codes, those are laws created by the same agencies that then enforce those laws. Then they have their own administrative hearing judges, or the ALJs, the administrative law judges. They have their own executive, legislative, and judicial branches within themselves. They are a law unto themselves, and this is where we're really seeing an erosion of rights. So with this particular case, we just had our case dismissed in federal court. We are going to go back and amend it. But one thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that the Human Rights Commission is at the heart of most of the civil rights issues that are going on in our state. Union Gospel Mission, which you guys partake in and partner with, they were sued by a man named Mr. Woods. You may be familiar. He is a bisexual man who applied for an attorney position with Union Gospel Mission. They denied him that because they said, it's our statement of faith and our statement for all of our employees that you have to abide by these principles, which included not being in extramarital relationships, having sex outside of marriage, and having sex as only between husband and wife, as defined by God. You have to sign this, and then you have to have a pastor that says, yes, this person's actively going to church. The Supreme Court of the state of Washington single-handedly destroyed the ministerial exception. That exception says that churches, they don't want entanglement with the states, and it says that churches can operate how they want. Their affairs are their own. And Union Gospel Mission is a nonprofit that is very, very closely tethered to the Word of God. They really are. Some nonprofits maybe less so, but they're very steeped in the Word of God. Everybody there is Christian. And so the Supreme Court said, you have to determine if an attorney is really a minister, and they said that it was not, and that they were in violation of the law, the Washington law against discrimination, by not hiring a homosexual attorney. So now Union Gospel Mission has they can't hire anyone from IT because they have all of these people coming at them applying for jobs that aren't, just to sort of light the fire. So ADF, which is another nonprofit, they're bringing suit on behalf of them. We're bringing suit on behalf of Olympus Spa, and then you're probably all familiar also with the Seattle Pacific University cases, perhaps not, but they're being represented by Beckett. And again, the Washington law against discrimination, as enforced by the Human Rights Commission through the Attorney General's offices, they wouldn't hire, or they terminated a homosexual teacher. It got a bunch of traction. The AG's office said, please email us if you've ever felt discriminated against by SPU, and then they came after them. And this is a private small college in Seattle that is Christian. And granted, they kind of let things slide and had to backtrack, but you can see, I mean, these are very loud and public cases that are coming out of Washington from this agency and this law, and they're really focusing in just on a very small, minute group of the public. As I brought up to the judge in our case, in our spa case, they have always discriminated on the basis of gender. They've never let men in. That's against the law too. They have always discriminated on the basis of age. 13-year-olds and under cannot come in. In the state of Washington, we have ratings on movies that don't allow certain ages into certain places. It's generally been distinctive as to men and women. But you see how the devil gets a hook in for that very small percentage of individuals, and then everyone else suffers for it. And these are people who need our compassion. I'm not speaking out in any kind of anger against them. I see what the devil is doing in twisting these people's minds. But to put others at risk, and we see it all over in sports, and this is just the latest hot button, but that's why it is so important that we get out and vote, that we know who our representatives are. And I wanted, before I pass it off to Kate, to bring to your attention, as I was driving through town, I saw the yard signs for a city council member named Paul Dillon. What many of you may not be aware of, and I'm intimately aware of it because of a case I have had, Paul Dillon is the president of Planned Parenthood for Greater Planned Parenthood of North Idaho and Washington. And I had a case against Planned Parenthood with TCAP. And if any of you are familiar, so the church at Planned Parenthood, if you've ever gone, they meet outside of Planned Parenthood here one night per month. And it was very large. I mean, obviously it was drawing a lot of people, had a lot of, the spirit was really moving, and it really angered Planned Parenthood, the devil, really angered him. So they brought suit to enjoin their proceedings. And long story short, this was my first case at PJI, and I was shocked that this case held merit and water at all. TCAP was holding services at 5 p.m., which is close to closing hour. They were on the sidewalk. The police were always present. They always had, it was kind of roped off, very calm. But again, what the devil loves to do, he kind of drew them in via social media with some comments. The judge paid particular attention to that. There was a lot of social activists that were out there, making comment, had declarations, which is a legal term for a letter written to the court. And anyway, TCAP now has to meet across the street. They can't start till 7 p.m., and they can't even have service on Saturday when Planned Parenthood is closed. I mean, this case was ridiculous, and I don't know, that case is very painful for me when I saw how much the judicial system favors the right for abortion over the constitutional rights, and how this has crept in and how it continues to creep in, and we're living in very precarious times for our rights. We have to be very thoughtful and very prayerful about how we approach what we do and how we fight it, but there are ways and means, and those ways and means are in the court. We are very fortunate to have the composition of the Supreme Court that we do right now. And at PJI, we're very carefully, and our chief counsel, Kevin Snyder, is very, very wise, and he knows exactly how to fight and what to fight on to ensure that we have good precedent. The worst thing an attorney can do is to take a bad case forward with bad facts just to try to fight a bummer law, but then get precedent, which is precedential value in courts is almost stronger than the law. I mean, it sets the tone. How judges did it in the past is how judges do it today. That's what you don't want to get, is precedent set, which disfavors our rights. And so at PJI, we're strategically fighting things on all fronts. We appreciate your support. And I don't know what our timing is exactly. I don't want to run over, but I'll hand it over to Kate, and then we can talk some more and have some questions as necessary.
Thank you. So like Tracy said, I am located in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and what I kind of want to highlight is, yes, Idaho is a very different political atmosphere than Washington, but that doesn't mean we don't have problems there. And it doesn't mean the devil is not alive and well there and working however possible. So probably the number one place we see this in Idaho is in the public school system. And there is a lot of effort to shut down public comments, comments during school of employees of school districts who have Christian beliefs, who have conservative beliefs, and they're expressing those. That is a major problem, even in the state of Idaho, and have several cases involving Christian employees of school districts who have expressed their views and have been fired for it. Students as well. Students getting up and expressing their beliefs. The gender ideology thing is alive and well in Idaho. It doesn't stop at the state line, unfortunately. We do have, I think, greater hope in the legislature. So we do have a very conservative legislature. Governor could be better. But so our goal, PJI, is trying to capitalize on that and create good laws. So we're involved in drafting bills and testifying in favor of them, talking to members of the legislature to vote for these laws that would improve our freedoms, our parental rights especially. So that's kind of an insight into a lot of what I do there, is try to reinforce what we have and capitalize on the fact that we do have a better makeup in our legislature. So I would say schools are such a problematic thing. No matter what state you're in, the public school system really has one viewpoint, and they like that one viewpoint, and it is not a biblical one. And they will do what they need to do to suppress the speech of those who disagree with that. So I don't know how I'm on time. Are we okay?
If we clear that up, then we'll be up.
Yeah. Do you want to do Q&A? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Brad, our founder, would not be happy with me if I didn't go over our signups. So hopefully are they on the back? Okay, maybe they can get handed out. If you would all please put down your name and your email address at the very least. We have so many programs we offer. There's daily His Channel. There's a website called hischannel.com that houses quite a few legal entities. They do daily shows. Brad, our founder, does one every day. Occasionally we're on it, and he has other guests. We do sometimes weekly, maybe monthly Zoom calls with all of the people who subscribe that you can log on to. We do case updates. Just, you can really find out what's going on, and it'll keep you abreast. You can get a hold of us if you're on our email newsletter or even going to the website, pji.org. We really just want to keep you in the loop on what's going on here in Washington and at large. And I will say, through COVID, when I started at PJI, it's actually a cool story, so I'll talk about it while we're handing these out. I had just started practicing law again. Kind of long story. I don't want to make it too long, but I was recently widowed, and I didn't know what I was going to do sort of going forward to provide for my family. And COVID had started, and our pastor, I go to Calvary Chapel in Tri-Cities, he was talking about being approached to sue the governor, because at that time he had shut down all the churches, if you all remember. And so before he kind of tweaked the proclamation, they were going to sue, and he mentioned PJI. And I thought, I should reach out to them because I'm here. If they bring suit here, I can maybe help. And so I did, and the attorney at the time, Jorge, and I became friends. And about a month later, he told me that he was leaving and I should apply for the position. And so I did, and long story short, God provided, and here I am. And what this job affords me the opportunity to do is to still be at home, to be able to get my children off to school, which is important for me. And so PJI helps us in our ministries too as mothers. Kate and I are both mothers, and being able to work, in a place that respects that in the legal world is rare. So we're really blessed by that. So thank you. You're blessing us twice. Do you have anything you want to?
Just real quick. Just to echo on what she said, yeah, I mean, I'm so thankful for this job and this opportunity. Working at a big law firm, you work 16-hour days, no one cares about your home life whatsoever. So yes, as mothers, it's an enormous blessing that we get to do this. And we have fantastic coworkers and bosses, and it's really an enormous blessing. So thank you very, very much.
And through that generous giving, PJI went from, when I came on, it was California, Oregon, Washington, I think, a smattering of a handful of other offices. And we now, I could tell you more of the states that we're in than we're not. And so the growth, I think people saw through COVID, really how much the overreach has infiltrated all states, not just the blue states. It's worse in a blue state for sure, but all states were deeply affected by the parental rights issues. And I guess my encouragement to you guys or anyone, moms, future moms, et cetera, to the extent you're able, get your kids out of the public school system. I know that we're not to flee, but the children shouldn't be the bait to try to go out and spread light. They're young and they're vulnerable. We as the parents can fight back against that, and perhaps in high school, that's fine. But to the extent that you're able, homeschool your kids or volunteer every day at your kid's school. My son, he did go to public school this year. He had an IEP. He's in kindergarten, and I was at the school often. I had a medical power of attorney on file there that ensured that they weren't giving him any medicines or any kind of counseling that I wasn't aware of. My children are unvaccinated, so I had them in public school their first year with that. And so, if you are doing public school and you have reasons that you have to do that, there are ways to ensure that your rights and your children's protections remain intact. And a lot of that is trying to get into the school and be there, hands and feet. Do you, real quick before we go to questions and answers, I just want to go back to the Paul Dillon as a council member here in the city. When I went to law school here in Spokane, I would say it was still fairly conservative. I don't know that I could say that. I mean, I think that there's definitely, pools of it, but it seems that there's a growing number of city council members that are very liberal. I don't know if there's anyone running against Paul Dillon, but at the very least, I think it's very important that people know where he works and what it is that he does there. And however, you guys can help to get the word out to the community, obviously without, in the best, most respectable way possible. It needs to be known that that man is an abortionist and works at Planned Parenthood, which, does not serve women at all. So I think that's one of the greater lies that Satan tells, is that this place cares about women and what they do there isn't harmful to women and to the public in general. Men also, everyone is harmed by what goes on in those buildings. So do you guys have any particular questions for us? It can be on a range of anything. Yes, please.
Yeah, we volunteer at Moody Aviation, and part of our role is we're mandatory reporters for Title IX.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So with sexual harassment and all that stuff, and
Right.
from the training and stuff, it seems like a pretty good thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets kids help. And there's a great
Right.
department in Moody, Chicago, that deals with all that stuff. But there's stuff coming through the Biden administration about adding transgender and all that to that, and so far, Moody's been like, we're not doing any of that, but I don't know legally, is all that coming or
Yeah,
do you know how that?
Is Moody a nonprofit? Or is
It's
it-
a Christian Bible college.
Yeah. So if you're not accepting federal funds, then usually you're exempted out of any federal mandates. You probably will be. But again, with this Union Gospel Mission case and what the Supreme Court of Washington decided, and I think that it will get, in the midst of that case, they applied for a review to the Supreme Court. That's like an emergency review. The Supreme Court said at that time, no, because this case is still progressing. We're not going to review it now. But now that they're in federal court, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. And I'm almost certain the Supreme Court will say, no, you cannot touch ministerial exceptions or exemptions. And they will say that any nonprofit which is devoted to furthering faith or very faith-tethered, which Moody is, right? If I'm understanding which branch of Moody, then you probably will be exempted out of that for the ministerial exception. As far as the, transgenderism and more of the Title IX things, my thoughts, I don't know.
The whole misinterpretation of Title IX not being about biological sex is obviously a huge issue. It's being pushed by the Biden administration and states. It's pervasive. I'm also pretty confident if that issue gets to the Supreme Court, they will put everyone back in their place that yes, the intention of this law when it was passed by Congress was biological sex, period, end. So pray for that. I think there's a lot of cases working their way up very slowly. Of course, it's a very slow process through the federal courts, hoping one gets to the Supreme Court and that they do what they're supposed to do.
And originally protecting the differences between men and women, you can see how the devil has twisted that. But I also would kind of bring back that this is not a legal standpoint, but it's full circle feminism. If feminism goes out and says women can do anything men can do and doesn't respect the differences therein, this is where that full circle comes. And it just, it's kind of like you get what you ask for. And so I think walking that back, this would be, in particular to women, is just respecting the boundaries of what God has placed on us and not, just respecting those boundaries so that everyone has to respect those boundaries. That's from a biblical standpoint. That's not going to hold sway in the public. But, we can't pray for the kind of change we're asking God for if we're on board here and not on board, as to the differences that God laid in the Bible. So I think that's important as we pray and as we live out our lives. But I don't think that, as particularly for private entities, that it's going to be as much of an issue. But when you've got the sports, if we're talking about sports, and you're in, larger D1, D2, where the sports are going on, it's here to stay. And I don't see how you would get out of universities, even private ones, not having to play at least against schools that allow transgenders. And I think even amongst the Christian universities, there's a lot of bending towards this cultural, line. And so I don't know what the future holds. I think the law will uphold the right to say, no, we're not going to engage in anything Title IX wise that forces us to accept what's not in God's word. But, the world at large isn't going to hold to that. Does that answer your question? Cool.
I've heard about litter boxes in public schools in the state of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
What do you about that?
Yeah. So again, you just keep taking things further and further, right? What started off as maybe feminism, then moves into transgenderism, then moves into transhumanism. And so the idea is that there are children who think that they're cats or dogs or whatnot, and they, the parents are indulgent. And again, this comes down to the parents. When your kids are in, largely, if the parents are supporting a child in this delusion, and children are imaginative, they'd like to play dress up. I mean, I was a tomboy. Thank God my parents, thank you God that my parents, were of the right mind. Nowadays, anyway. So yes, that is, I don't know that it's in every school system, but you see the spirit of deception that has come upon this generation and how it just keeps making more of a mockery out of those who are created in God's image. Teachers I have heard of schools, and I think it depends probably more so in the uber liberal cities, but there are children who think they're cats and they have to have litter boxes in the room so that they can do their business in the litter box. And then you can see how, again, how would you even speak to an animal? I mean, it's so redundant and ridiculous, and what you see is a distraction from all the other kids who are there to learn, who are there to just be kids and just want to learn, and you've got one child amongst the many with serious behavioral problems that then becomes the focus of that, and that's rampant in the school system.
And unfortunately, this is in Idaho, too. Right where I live in Coeur d'Alene, this is going on. Other students who are distracted by this going on, obviously, in the classroom, who speak up are told to keep their mouths shut and to not say anything and to not disparage these people. So this is everywhere. The public school system is incredibly broken in every state. And like Tracy said, if you have the means to not have your kids in public schools, that would be optimal. If not, absolutely make sure you're very involved and that you know your parental rights, so that you know when they're being infringed upon.
And, towards that end, PJI can help set up co-ops. We can help set up nonprofits. If you all wanted to do a school, however that looked, moms, you can get together with other moms and do co-ops. And, the state can't force you yet to have your child go to school. So, take advantage of the opportunity and the time that you have. Homeschooling is not as difficult as I think one would imagine from what I've heard from everyone else. So, yeah.
On those lines, has there been any success at taking back the fundage that is put toward public schools and bringing it back into whether it's a charter school or a co-op and such, so that that money could then be used to actually educate the child it was set forth for?
Right. I've actually had a lot of contact with charter schools here in Spokane. Oftentimes, charter schools end up being for kids who just are, the public school is not working for them. So they're still held to the same standards. And it's a great opportunity if you are a teacher, to get in there. One bill I will highlight that, I'm going to get off track for just a moment, but I'll come back, that was passed. I forget the name of it, but in Washington State, it's now mandatory for part of the curriculum to include constitutional civic learning in our schools. So as we teach our children what their constitutional rights are, and they know what that means to them, they can start to assert those rights in their classroom, standing up. And that's the biggest thing, is providing a way for children to know what right and wrong is and have a choice. Again, we see the litter box things where kids are like, oh, that gets attention. Cool, I want attention. We all have innately in us a desire to belong, because that's our desire to belong to God. And we look to other things to fill it. And especially for our youth who don't know the Lord, they're going to be looking at anything they can to try to fit in and stand out. It's that standing out and fitting in, feeling like I belong. And as we walk here on the earth, we're kind of strangers in a strange land, and we all feel that way. And God is the only thing that can fill that space. So with charter schools and co-ops, I will say this: if you accept money from the government, you're tied to their hand, and they feed you what they want you to digest. And so, I think there's varying degrees of that. If you have a child in public school, I would definitely say that you get them on what's called a 504. There's two different kinds of plans. There's IEP, which are independent education programs. Those are usually for children with disabilities, but any child can be on one. That is state and federal funded, and so it's very particular, I think, in the approach. But the 504s are not federally funded, so you don't have the same mandates and requirements within that education program. So if you had particulars that you wanted your child to learn, again, I think it might be pushing the bounds to have them have an all-Christian class syllabus, but I think you could do some things there if your child has to be in public school with the 504 program. It's not federally funded. It's not quite so tied to all of the state mandates, and that way you could extricate your children from some of the teachings. The problem that we're seeing now is that the indoctrination is woven into the fabric of the curriculum in a manner that it's inextricable. And we've got a list, and I can send it, if you guys sign up for our emails, we've got a sheet basically that you can put on file at the school that says, my child shall not be taught these things, and it has a list of the RCWs that they're exempted out of. The thing about that is becoming more difficult with that is that it's woven in, and the teacher has a lot of autonomy, especially for the younger kids. And if you indoctrinate kids from a young age, and I think we've all seen the videos coming up of schools, everyone's wearing a pride flag, et cetera. I mean, it's the only sin that we celebrate. I don't know if we thought about that, but pride isn't something to celebrate in any fashion, function, like whatever it is. Pride is not a thing to be celebrated, and generally we don't celebrate it. The difference with like the LGBTQ things is that they're not religious based. and this is where you can see the devil was very clever in this, with religion-based thoughts, ways, celebrations, it violates the anti-establishment clause. So the schools can't get into it. With the LGBTQ, it's based on sex. And so it doesn't violate the anti-establishment clause, so they can really hype that, and they do, obviously. So I kind of keep getting off track, I'm sorry, but the charter schools and the co-ops do, where co-ops are more independent than charter schools are. But there are lots of options out there if you find that you cannot extricate yourself from the public school system entirely. Are there any other questions? Are we out of time?
I do. One more? My wife and I just bought a property that has potential to do wedding venues.
Oh, cool.
And we know the state's laws and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
do you guys have proactive services to where we could try to set up our wedding venue in a way where we could legally say no? And
Right.
do that?
I would say your best bet is to set it up as a 501c3, to have it offer weddings, and that would end up probably being your main income stream, but also to house events centered around biblical teachings. If you can find a way to sort of, as a 501c3, that would give you your ministerial exception. Now,
Okay.
yeah, and make it as church-like as you possibly can. Because,
Well, that was our plan anyways.
Yeah.
We were going to start a ministry with some other ideas that
Yeah.
would be attached to that, counseling and
Yeah.
all that. So that's the right direction.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
cool.
would set it up that way, and then don't advertise it only as a venue for weddings. Have that be one of the
Interesting.
the accoutrements, if you will. But
Cool.
that's one ministry. That's the only way you're going to get around it, because we saw that. For instance, in Pasco, Arlene's Flowers. You guys familiar with that case? She was a florist down in Pasco who wouldn't do wedding. She had clients. These were friends of hers. They were clients. They came in, and they were gay, and they would buy flowers. But then they wanted to have her do their wedding flowers, and she said, "No, I can't." And then it just ended up being this case that they upheld what's called a neutral law of general applicability, which is, the Washington law against discrimination is neutral, and it applies to everyone. So they upheld it, and that's going to be what you want to stay away from.
Well, thank you. Can we give him a hand real quick? Would it be all right if we pray for you here in a little bit? Awesome. I didn't tell the whole story. Perhaps part of the reason why PGI was on my heart was before I was a full-time pastor, I was at work and I was and indirectly being accused of being racist and going to have to go before the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? It's not racist. I hate racism, as you all know. But it was just one of those stupid things. So a friend gave me a number, and I called and talked to Tracy. She was in the airport waiting, and she talked over everything that I was worried about, what to do, what not to do, and basically said, all right, when this happens, call me. And that brought me so much peace of mind. And I thought, what a useful ministry. I didn't give any money. There was no invoice. It was just a fellow believer helping me with what I needed at that time.